today. So Raphael.
Thank you, Julia. And I'll just say, I expect heckling from this crowd. Thank you, Julia, and thanks to the team at Creative Mornings and Palm Beach Tech and the sponsors for hosting this event. I'm proud to be here. So when this topic of taboo was thrown out to me, well, first I opened my mouth too fast and I said, yeah, sign me up for March. And she said, okay, you're talking about taboo. So, you know, that's not one that as an urban planner or as a regular guy in the community you frequently talk about in social gatherings like this, because taboos are those things that you don't usually touch, right? They're too sacred or they're too profane or these things that can't be challenged or touched. But when I thought about it a little more deeply, I thought that there are some things that I could definitely connect with on this topic, both in my personal life and in my professional life. So starting with me, this is my mother, my father, and little baby me. In January of 1969 in Bronx, New York, my lovely mom, Gail Alicia Berlin, a nice little Jewish girl from Westchester County, New York. My father, Adrian Clemente, the coolest guy I know, from Puerto Rico, from Carolina. And in the year that they got together, interracial marriage could get you 10 years in prison in some states in the United States of America. So from the very beginning, that taboo of race and who can be with who was very present in my life. Not from my family and not from my people that I was around, but in just sort of, it was a reminder to me that I was different. And it got sort of like it went from 10 to 11 when I was about 4 years old. My mom and dad separated when I was 2. And my mother remarried Frederick Anthony Zingaro, like this total caricature of a New York Italian guy from this giant New York family. So then I was the only brown kid in an all-white family in an all-white neighborhood in Lake Worth, Florida, where we moved to from the Bronx. And I see a lot of concerned faces out there. I don't regret this one bit. This was probably the coolest, most informative, strengthening, empowering experience that I could have had as a kid, because I had a lot of incredible people around me. My parents, my grandparents, my extended family, and a lot of great friends. So for me, I see it as a real advantage. I became one of those rebellious punk kids on skateboards, tearing stuff up all over the place. That's that was maybe my favorite place as a 15-year-old kid, that photograph there. That's the 10th Avenue drainage ditch. You've all been there, right? That's the 10th Avenue and I-95. And you can see all those streaks there that look like blood or something there on the concrete. That was the city of Lake Worth's attempt to keep us from skateboarding there. They poured tar all over it. And that just, for us, it made it look cooler. But as a kid, and I'll tell you why, I mean, this sort of feeds into what I'm going to talk about, but I never understood why there were so many controls on what we could do in public space. We weren't damaging anything, we weren't bad kids, we weren't vandals, we just wanted to play. And those experiences as a kid running the streets have really gone to inform how I conduct myself as a professional in the field of urban planning. As a young adult, I found my way into competitive cycling. In fact, some friends in the room are people I know through that experience. And I got to travel, I got to spend some time in Europe and Central and South America, and particularly Europe, and the time I spent there changed the way I thought about cities and about places for people. At the time, I had no idea that I would go on to get a master's in urban planning, but I did come back to my hometown, in my country, in my culture and society, and think, wow, we could do things a little bit differently. But there were all these conventions and sort of rules in place about why we couldn't do them. These taboos, these things that we create, for good or bad, that hold things in place, like interracial marriage, or like, you know, some of these are good, right? You don't steal candy from a baby, you don't heckle old people, you know. Those are good taboos. But there are some things that really need to change, and there are those sacred cows that I think, you know, could allow us to do things differently. So in 2006, I landed here in downtown West Palm Beach. I had come to the Downtown Development Authority to talk to the then director, a fellow named Peter Armato, and to talk to him about a greenway connection, a shared use trail connection to the downtown area. And after a long rambling conversation that went on far longer than I thought it would, he said, hey, would you like to work here? And I had a new baby on the way and a new house, and I thought, let me think about that for a while. And after giving it some thought and thinking about where I was, I thought this was an opportunity for me to really sort of use my passion to drive change and to challenge those conventions and those untouchable sacred cows of how we plan and use public spaces. So I took him up on that offer. So as an urban planner, many of you go, well, what do you guys plan and what do you guys do? The field of urban planning deals with pretty much anything that's happening with development in a city. So there's a lot of rules that go into place. There's a lot of things that are certainty and expectation and the notion that value over time is going to be protected, quality of life is going to be protected, is the foundation of urban planning. And we're good at that, right? But the thing that jumps out to me is control, that word control, in this classic definition of urban planning. And we're great at controlling things. We're great at putting these constructs and these frameworks on things and saying, this is how it's got to be. But what that is not good at is change, particularly social change, demand change, system change, right? Because we build these giant systems and suddenly these pieces of it that are immovable objects that are untouchables, that when you try to move them, you get pushed back on, become challenges for making your place better. And this is the introductory page from the first plan that was drafted for the city of West Palm Beach. John Nolan, he was a visionary planner. So when I was getting my master's degree, the first book I read before I ever took a course was The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. Anybody, who in this room has read it? It's a great read. If you haven't read it and you're interested in how places work and why, it's a great read. Jane Jacobs was not an urban planner. She was a community organizer that stood up to fight against a freeway project that was coming through her neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. And she said, hell no, you're not going to do this. And she organized people and fought back and did some incredibly important work that has now informed the field of urban planning. And the words that jump out to me from her quote in this particular instance: congenial, unofficial ideas, opportunities. Right? Human beings are unpredictable. If you put all these things in place and all these rules in place, some very important rules, but some they're not that important, but they become things that people hold on to and they won't let go. Is this an official activity? Probably not. I was visiting my father in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he lives, the only Puerto Rican brown Amish guy up there. He's not really Amish, but he looks like he could be Amish. He's got a beard and overalls and everything. I was out. I love Lancaster. It's got incredible history and architecture, and it's got these awesome houses. And I was looking for this house that I'd seen. I wanted to take a picture of it. It's got a huge stained glass window in the back that's probably as old as the house. And I was cutting through this alleyway, and there's this gathering in the alleyway of these people having a picnic. So I asked those two nice ladies there leaning against the garage on the right side of the image. I said, what's going on here? They said, oh, every so often we have a picnic here in the alleyway because it's easy for us to pull all of our chairs and tables out of our garages and we can go to our kitchens and bring everything out into the alleyway. And I took a picture of it. They looked at me a little weird, but I took a picture of what they were doing because to me, this was the embodiment of, it was that practice that humans are unpredictable in city spaces, in public spaces, in effect. This is where they wanted to have a picnic. There was an amazing park 3 blocks away, but this was their space, and it was always their space. But that's not what we've built, and that's not what we've allowed, right? We have created systems that are single use, primarily, right? We've got a great downtown in West Palm, Lake Worth, Delray. There's some incredible good urban spaces. But overwhelmingly, in the past 50 years or more, we've built places that are single use, inhumane, dangerous, ugly, homogeneous, unsustainable places, and very expensive places to maintain and to put people through. This is sort of where I'm going with this, is that when we as professionals in the field of city building and change confront that system, there is a wall, and there's a wall of often professionals saying No, can't touch that. This is an unchangeable construct for so many reasons, and I'm going to talk about those. First, what we measure, because in my opinion, this is the foundation of how you quantify what you need to work on, right? So we are really, really good at measuring stuff. Buildings, GDP, educational attainment, school attendance. We're not really good at measuring how people use space. This is a mind-bogglingly detailed slide. I would never use this for anything other than to make a glaring example. These are motor vehicle counts from Palm Beach County's Traffic Engineering Department over a 10-year period for roads in and around downtown West Palm Beach. And I love this number right here, like 61,345, bink, period, like to the last single car. We've counted average daily traffic for every road in and around downtown West Palm Beach that's a county road. Oops. That's what they don't count at all, ever. They don't count human beings. They don't count bikes, they don't count transit riders, they don't count people walking. This picture's taken in downtown West Palm Beach, just over here on Quadro Boulevard at Fern Street, probably. And this lady, I promise you, was not counted in Palm Beach County or the Department of Transportation's assessment of how that road is used and who uses it. And she lives in one of the assisted living facilities on the east end of Fern Street, and she's walking back to her place from Publix with her groceries, and she's scurrying across that big high-speed road without a really convenient crosswalk. And you know, this is our challenge. But when we as professionals, and I see two of my fellow change agents in the room, we get pushback. And I asked this question yesterday at a public meeting: do you count people? No, we don't. We count cars. This is broken. But the good news is, one of my favorite slides, is one of my favorite images. Andy Singer, he has a book called Cartoons, emphasis on car. There is a groundswell of change. How many people didn't drive here today? Awesome. That's higher than I thought. Fantastic. So this is changing, and predominantly, all of you who call yourselves millennials in this room, I'm a Gen Xer. Who's a Gen Xer? Go Gen X. Predominantly, nationwide, you millennials are pushing this trend, right? The old idea of who was the successful person, big car, important guy, drove everywhere. If you were walking, riding a bike, or riding the bus, you have not arrived. Clearly, you have not arrived. But that has changed tremendously. And this is what's going to change the system ultimately, right? This is what's going to break those taboos of auto dominance and how we have to plan and build cities. Taking it up one level, who's really being subsidized? This is my favorite one, because this is where you're sticking your hand in their pockets and grabbing their wallet out to address this one. Who's being subsidized in this system? So the idea, that the notion always is that the single use component, single family housing, single occupant vehicle, pay-as-you-go process is the one that is really assigning cost to the end user, when in fact, it's not. Sprawling, auto-oriented development is tremendously more expensive than close-in urban neighborhood development. And I don't mean high-rise buildings, I don't mean Manhattan, I mean West Palm Beach, I mean Delray. Compact mixed-use development is much more of a sustainable value-add type of pattern of development. But this is maybe the biggest taboo there is, because this is in urban planning and city building, is because when you approach this system, you've got to change the entire funding structure to get cities, counties, elected officials, and others to move the ball to the other side of the field. This one I particularly like a lot. Roads, and you might not be able to see that, $26 per housing unit. Roads in suburban pattern, $260 per housing unit. And that's just to build it. That's not to maintain it and operate it over time. The notion, the idea I've always heard as an advocate, I'm very passionate about transportation because I think it's an equity issue as much as it is a utilitarian thing for people. But everybody, most professionals I talk to, this is a big sacred cow, they say transit is subsidized. Transit users don't really pay their own way. Transit is subsidized. Yes, it is. And to some small fraction, so is biking and walking, but so small we could literally throw those out, right? Single occupant vehicle travel gets an almost 10-to-1 subsidy from the user, the consumer, and then the public dollars. And that's not just money, that's externalized impacts like pollution, crashes, injuries, etc. And then this one, this is putting a decimal point on it, right? So this is a printout from Palm Beach County. I'm picking on them today a little bit, right? This is a printout from an impact fee assessment. That number there, $142,264.79, was an impact fee that was being pushed, being imposed on a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot restaurant that was going to occupy a previous old warehouse right in the north end of downtown here. It was changing use from warehouse to restaurant, and that amount of money is what was being asked of the property owner to offset the additional trips, motor vehicle trips, for his restaurant. But we know, yes, $142,000. It's insane, right? Thank you, Jamie. But this is a system that is, right now, I mean, we talk about these things, these rules that are in place, these untouchable things. I love to call them sacred cows, but those taboo things. To change this right now, it has been it's coming up on a 5-year conversation about this system. This almost killed the project. Thankfully, a lot of people, myself included, Chris Rug and others, lined up in support of this and proved how ridiculous this was. And it was significantly, tremendously reduced. Not entirely wiped out, but tremendously reduced. And if it wasn't, that project would have been killed. It's a new restaurant called Butcher Shop. It's a second location coming up out of Miami. It's incredible that we have them here, but we almost didn't have them here because of this really, really sort of broken, antiquated system, right? These are one of those rules that need to change. This is interracial marriage prohibition. This is 10 years in jail for interracial marriage from the traffic planning perspective. You cannot marry a restaurant and a warehouse, no. We will put you in jail. And then the process. So I've always been fascinated by who engages and who doesn't engage. This forum is inviting to many different people. I see ages, I see races, I see genders, different professions, different walks of life. This is an open, exciting, attractive type of way to engage and converse with your peers, to share information. But the typical way we do this is a very cardboard, programmed, controlled system, right? You come and sit on comfortable plastic chairs, and you listen to an expert tell you, here's what we're gonna do, and here's why you want this. And then if you want to be heard, you step up to the microphone and you speak in front of a big room full of people, maybe on camera. That doesn't work for everybody. In fact, it works for few people. And what I've noticed at least in the 11 years I've been at the Downtown Development Authority, is that it's usually the same people who are comfortable in this environment that come and engage with the process. And they're there for the right reasons, and they're there to do good things. But there's a whole giant group of people that don't connect with this process. They may not even know about this process, right? It's a single mom with 2 kids. It's that Guatemalan guy in my neighborhood that I ride my bike to downtown with every morning. It's people that just don't have the time, aren't reading the paper or looking online for that meeting posting. But what if we flipped that around? What if we took the process to them? What if we loosened those controls, broke the rules, and said, we're gonna go to you in your place. We're gonna come to you with an open agenda and say, what do you want your community to be? How do you want it to work, and why? So the city of West Palm Beach is doing that, thankfully, right? These 2 images are of Gale Architects' work here in West Palm. This one's in Howard Park in my neighborhood. That one I think is at a community center in the north end of the city. And what they've done and what they've become experts at over the past 40 or so years is truly engaging the community. This was done in more than one language. This was done in many different places. I happened to be there for the one in Howard Park, and what I thought was so cool was there were all these families with kids on the playground and people playing soccer and people walking by. They walked up to this thing and answered the questions. Where do you walk? Where do you bike? What do you want your park to be? They filled out sticky notes with, there's no curb ramp here, so when I'm walking my kid in a stroller, I have to go down over a curb and it's challenging for me. I'm afraid my stroller's going to turn over. I mean, all these things were pulled out of people by going to them. People that would have never, ever engaged with the process otherwise. So I love this slide, and it's not my sketch. I can't even write that clearly. My doctor can't understand my handwriting, right? Bad joke. This is Michael Colville Anderson. He is, I would call him a visionary transportation planner. He is based in Copenhagen, Denmark, and he has an organization called Copenhagen Eyes. He's working around the world. You can look him up. He is definitely bold and doing incredibly big and important things. He was recently in Miami, I think, Copenhagen Eyes, Michael. But this is a sketch, a napkin sketch, if you will, about how we can change this process. Right now, we have this very paternalistic, top-down, we're the expert, you're a unit in the system. You're one of those cars on Okeechobee Boulevard, and this is what we're going to do. This is how we've got to do it, because this is how we always do it. This is how we always do it. Biggest taboo there is. I hate that phrase. This is how we've always done it. Well, it doesn't work. You've got to change it. Why can't we flip it upside down? Who are we? How do we use our space? How do we behave first? How do we behave? I bike and walk to work pretty much every day. And in the many years that I've been doing that, I find these little trails all the time. And you've all seen them, right? The sidewalk ends, and then there's that footpath that just keeps going, that's worn through the grass, or that cuts across a field. Cut deep, it's just dirt. People use that path all the time, right? These are these wish trails, if you call them, or desire lines, right? That's what Michael Colville Anderson calls them, desire lines. And that's the physical manifestation of something that isn't there that people want. It's like a ghost saying, this is what I want, can you put a sidewalk here, please? But we could flip this upside down and get a much better outcome and get a much better level of satisfaction from our user group, you, them that are not here today, them that don't go to that public meeting. This would really work for those people, for all of us. And then now taking it all the way up to the top of what I think we should go for, instead of outcomes that can be quantified in dollars or outcomes that can be quantified in other things, maybe we should look at overall happiness as satisfaction as a measure of how our place works, right? Money's important. I love money. It gets me options. It gives me options. I have two beautiful daughters. I want to pay for their college, right? My 11-year-old keeps telling me she wants to go to Harvard. And that prepaid College Florida Fund, I read the fine print, it doesn't pay for Harvard. But I think we should be measuring overall happiness, and people are doing that. Countries are doing that. Cities are starting to do that. Are we happy, right? And we're pretty happy. We're at 13. That isn't as good as we could do. It's not as good as we should do, right? But when you put it all together, and those of you who have seen me present before, I love this graphic. It's from Project for Public Spaces, or PPS. And I love it because it is a way to quantify and measure the things that can potentially be happiness for us, right? This is the idea of a place, whether it's that geographic spot somewhere or a place that we think of, right? That the construct of a place in our minds, and how can we measure it? And my favorite quadrant is this one here. I love that one because it's sociability. And survey after survey after survey has shown that the number one thing when people ask what do you love most about your place, your city, your neighborhood, whatever your living situation is the ability to connect with other people, to socialize, to have human interaction. right? And when we create places like that, we can support and foster happiness, literally, satisfaction. And that's ranked highest above potholes patched, above streetlights, above great schools. That sociability, the ability to connect to other people, is the most important thing. Second is usually aesthetics, community beauty. Is your place beautiful? So if we can use these words to describe our place, if people are using these adjectives to describe our place, friendly, fun, attractive, beautiful, then we've done a good job. I think that perception studies and perception surveys should be as important as traffic counts and property values when we quantify our place. But we're not there yet, and I think that if we're going to really elevate the process of making cities great for people, this needs to be part of it. Did I kill it? There we go. Whoa. Whoa. And I'll end with this slide. Those are my two girls. Kaya, the big one, Rel, the little one. And this was a completely random moment that, like that alleyway with the picnic, caught me as, not just as dad, which I love the picture because I love the smiles on their faces, but it caught me as urban planner. We were walking down the street, old part of Philadelphia, on a trip, and kind of grungy old part of Philadelphia, actually. And there was this little love note here. Completely unofficial. Somebody pasted it. It's like a decal that somebody scrubbed off the old oxidized paint, and they laminated this little message there. And my kids immediately ran over to this thing, and my little daughter, Rel, said, "Daddy, look, a Valentine." And I said, "That is, it's a love note. Get over there, take a picture." But this connected with me so powerfully because this was those random human pieces that the system we built, generally speaking, doesn't allow, doesn't value, doesn't quantify in the whole process of how we evaluate our places. So I think if we're considering all these things together, there are some major opportunities to break these taboos, to change the rules that are governing how we build and plan cities. And that's it.